The garden felt almost unreal. Sunlight slipping through the trees, petals drifting across the grass, and the scent of lilies surrounding me like a memory I didn't quite trust. Everyone was smiling, whispering about how romantic it was to renew vows after 10 years. I smiled too, for their sake. My dress was soft ivory, light against my skin, but my heart felt heavy. From the outside, I looked composed. Inside, I was holding my breath, wondering if love could really be reborn after so much silence. Michael had planned every detail, the flowers, the music, the guest list. He said he wanted to remind me who we were, back when everything still felt effortless. But as the priest began to speak, I noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his laughter came too quickly, too forced. He kept glancing around, avoiding my eyes. For a man who wanted to celebrate our love, he looked like someone waiting for the ground to open beneath him. Then the priest turned to me, asking if I'd remain faithful in body and spirit. My heart skipped. Michael's smile faltered, a bead of sweat running down his temple. That's when I realized something was off. Terribly off. The silence grew, long enough for people to whisper. I could have said I do without thinking, like I once did. But instead, I heard my own voice, calm and deliberate. I will, as long as he does the same. A quiet laugh rippled through the guests after my answer, but Michael's hand trembled inside mine. The priest smiled politely, unaware that something invisible had shifted between us. I felt it, like a thread snapping inside my chest. The rest of the ceremony blurred. Applause, music, flashes from cameras, all blending into one long hum of noise. I smiled for the photos, tilted my head toward him, pretended to glow. But my mind kept replaying that single look on his face, panic disguised as love. As we walked down the aisle, I could feel him squeezing my hand too tightly, as if to anchor me in place. He whispered something about dinner plans, about how everyone looked happy for us. His words barely reached me. My focus was on the pulse in his neck, the uneven rhythm that betrayed him. I'd always been good at reading people, especially him. That's the thing about loving someone for a decade. You learn to spot the cracks before they split wide open. At the reception, I drifted through the crowd like a ghost wearing my own smile. People toasted, laughed, called us an inspiration. I wanted to believe them, but every time Michael leaned in to kiss my cheek, I caught that faint scent. Cologne, mixed with something floral that wasn't mine. A perfume too sweet, too deliberate. I remember thinking, he smells like someone else's goodbye. And that thought stayed with me long after the music stopped. Later that evening, when the garden was empty and the lights had dimmed, I stood alone beneath the archway where we'd said our vows. The lilies were starting to wilt, their petals curling at the edges. I thought about the promises we'd just made, how fragile words could be when trust was already fractured. Somewhere inside the house, Michael was laughing with friends, his voice loud, too practiced. I listened, wondering how many lies it took to sound that carefree. When he finally came to me, his smile was all charm again. "We did it," he said, wrapping an arm around my waist. "We did what?" I wanted to ask, but instead I nodded, pretending to share his joy. My head rested on his shoulder, but my heart stayed distant, watching from somewhere far away. I felt like a spectator in my own marriage, the kind who already knows how the story ends, but watches anyway, hoping to be wrong. That night, after everyone left, I found myself staring at my reflection, still in that ivory dress. The vows echoed faintly in my mind, promises of faith, love, eternity. And then his face flashed before me again, that fleeting moment of fear when he looked at me. Something about it clung to my chest like a warning. I didn't know it yet, but that single look was the beginning of everything that would come undone. That night, after the celebration, I couldn't sleep. The laughter from earlier still echoed faintly in my head, but it sounded hollow now, like an old recording playing too slow. I sat at my vanity, removing my makeup one layer at a time, watching the woman beneath emerge. My reflection looked calm, but my chest tightened with unease. I kept replaying his face when the priest spoke. The hesitation, the panic that flashed for just a heartbeat. It didn't feel like nerves. It felt like guilt. When Michael came into the room, he acted as if everything was perfect. He loosened his tie, humming, pretending not to notice the tension in the air. "You were quiet today," I said, my voice careful, like testing thin ice. He smiled too quickly. "Big day," he said. "Makes a man sweat." I laughed softly. "Funny, you didn't sweat at our wedding." His smile twitched, but he didn't answer, just turned away, busying himself with nothing. I watched him from the mirror as he spoke, every movement rehearsed, every tone controlled. The more he tried to appear relaxed, the more unnatural he seemed. "You looked scared," I whispered finally. He froze for half a second, not long but long enough. Then came the defensive laugh. "Grace, you're imagining things." Maybe I was. But when he stepped into the shower, I found myself reaching for his phone. The screen glowed, and every message was gone. Deleted. Every single one. I stared at that empty screen for what felt like forever. My reflection shimmered faintly on the glass, eyes wide and searching, like I might find the truth in my own face instead. He'd erased everything, not just messages, but evidence of who he really was. I felt a sharp sting in my chest, part fear, part confirmation. Innocent men don't erase their words. I put the phone back exactly where it was, my hands trembling, my heart already rewriting our past in real time. When he came out of the shower, steam followed him, clouding the room like a secret refusing to lift. He kissed the top of my head and said, "Tired?" I nodded, afraid my voice would betray me. I wanted to scream, to ask who she was, to demand the truth. But the silence between us was safer than his answers. So I let him slip into bed beside me, his back turned, his breathing steady, the sound of a man at peace, while I drowned in questions. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting the beats of my own pulse. Each one felt louder than the last, as if my body were trying to warn me. The vows, the party, the laughter, all of it blurred into static. Beneath it, something darker pulsed, the certainty that my marriage had shifted into a game I hadn't agreed to play. And though I didn't know it yet, that quiet suspicion was about to become a storm. By morning, he was already dressed, coffee in hand, humming like a man with nothing to hide. I studied him from across the kitchen table, the same man who once made me laugh until my stomach hurt. Now every gesture looked rehearsed. He scrolled through his phone casually, but the brightness was turned down, the screen tilted just out of my sight. "Early meeting?" I asked. He nodded, eyes on the floor. He used to look at me when he lied. Now he didn't need to. After he left, I stood in the quiet, the smell of his cologne lingering in the air. The same scent that used to comfort me now made my stomach twist. I gathered our breakfast plates, trying to ignore the ache in my chest, but the doubt followed me like a shadow. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the messages were nothing. But my intuition, that quiet voice I'd silenced for too long, whispered otherwise. It told me I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't unsee. That evening, when he came home, I watched him through the reflection of the window instead of facing him directly. He talked about work, traffic, the usual things that fill a marriage like static between songs. I nodded, smiling in all the right places, but I was listening for cracks. Every word, every pause, every deflection felt like a clue. He had no idea I'd already started collecting them. And deep down, I knew this wasn't doubt anymore. It was the beginning of discovery. Over the next few days, the world felt heavier, like even the air carried secrets. Michael's late calls turned into longer absences. His excuses came prepackaged, meetings, deadlines, just catching up with an old friend. I didn't argue. Instead, I started paying attention to the silences between his words, to the faint perfume that lingered on his collar, sweet and unfamiliar. It wasn't mine. And when he hugged me goodnight, it smelled like someone else's goodbye. One evening, while folding laundry, I noticed the pocket of his suit jacket bulging slightly. I reached in and pulled out a small folded receipt, a boutique hotel downtown. My hands went cold as I read the date, 2 days before our vow renewal. Suite, champagne, $380. I stared at the paper like it might rewrite itself if I wished hard enough, but it didn't. The truth sat right there in black ink, and for a long moment I couldn't breathe. He came home later that night, smiling as if nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek, the same one that had flushed under his lies. I waited until after dinner, when the dishes were drying and the house was quiet. Then I said softly, "Did you forget something at the hotel?" His smile froze. "What hotel?" he asked, too fast. I held up the receipt between 2 fingers. "The one where you spent $380 for a suite and champagne, 2 days before you promised me forever." He went pale so fast it almost looked like the color drained from his soul. "It's not what you think," he stammered, his fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. "I was planning something special," he started, the words clumsy, half-formed. "A surprise." I watched his lips move, but I heard none of it. The lie was already too loud. My heart didn't race. It sank. Because the truth wasn't shocking anymore. It was just confirmation. I cut him off before he could spin another story. "You were planning a night," I said quietly, "just not with me." His mouth opened, but no words came. His silence was the confession I didn't need to hear. He rubbed his forehead, muttering something about stress, about misunderstandings. But his hands were shaking. I'd spent 10 years learning the language of his body, and right now, it was screaming. Every twitch, every blink, every swallowed breath was guilt in motion. He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was something colder. When the priest asked about fidelity, I whispered, "I thought you were nervous because you still loved me. Turns out you were terrified of being caught lying in a church." His face twisted, torn between fear and shame. He said my name once, softly, like a prayer he didn't deserve to say. But I'd already stopped listening. In that moment, I began planning my own kind of vow. That night, he slept on the far side of the bed, his back turned toward me, pretending exhaustion. I lay still, eyes open, watching the faint light move across the ceiling. Every sound, the slow rhythm of his breathing, the tick of the clock, felt like mockery. I thought about our vows, about the words he'd spoken so easily just days ago. Love, honor, faithfulness, all reduced to background noise in a ceremony he'd already betrayed. My tears never came. I'd run out of them years ago. I just hadn't realized it. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I smiled when he kissed my forehead goodbye, pretended to believe his excuse about a conference call, and waved from the doorway like a good wife. The truth was, I'd already started searching. Receipts, emails, cloud backups. I went through every trace of our shared life, like an archaeologist uncovering fossils of deception. And the more I found, the calmer I became. Pain was being replaced by purpose. When I saw her name for the first time, hidden in a hotel confirmation email, my heart didn't break. It steadied. That's when I understood something important. Betrayal doesn't destroy you all at once. It chips away slowly until you stop recognizing yourself. And then one day you do. You see everything. You wake up. And when I did, I wasn't the same woman who'd stood at that altar. I was someone quietly preparing her revenge. The next morning, I made him breakfast, eggs, coffee, and a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You're quiet," he said. I shrugged. "Just tired." Inside, I was anything but tired. My mind was awake in a way it hadn't been in years. I watched him scroll through his phone as he ate, pretending not to notice my presence. He thought I was drifting away, emotionally checked out. In truth, I was studying every move, every word, every lie, waiting for the right time to strike. When he left for work, I opened my laptop. I knew where to start. The hotel. A few clicks and I was on their social media page, scrolling through tagged posts from that same date. And there it was, a photo of him, blurred but unmistakable, standing outside the boutique's entrance. Beside him, a woman in a red dress, laughing, touching his arm. My stomach didn't drop. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I took a screenshot, then another. For once, I wasn't the one reacting. I was recording. That night, when he came home, I kissed his cheek and said softly, "Maybe we should host a dinner next weekend. Something to thank everyone who came to the renewal." His eyes brightened instantly, relief flickering through them like light through glass. "You mean it?" he asked. I smiled and nodded. "Of course. It'll show everyone we're okay." He kissed my forehead and called me amazing. I let him. Because the truth was, he'd just agreed to his own undoing. Over the next few days, I played my part flawlessly. I laughed when he made jokes, asked about his day, even leaned into his touch. Every gesture was calculated, rehearsed, perfect. He had no idea I'd already built a new rhythm, one that pulsed with patience instead of pain. I moved through the house like an actress in a play I'd written myself. Every scene mattered. Every line had meaning. And for the first time in years, I felt in control. When he left for the office, I started collecting pieces of the story he thought he'd buried. I printed the hotel receipt, the screenshots of him and the woman in red. I even found the messages he thought he'd erased, hidden in our shared cloud backup. Reading them didn't hurt. It clarified everything. She called him my escape. He called her the only thing keeping me sane. I laughed softly to myself. He'd used those same words on me once, back when I was still his refuge. By Thursday, the plan was set. I ordered flowers, cleaned the garden, sent invitations to our closest friends, the same ones who'd watched us renew our vows. A little post-vow dinner, I told them, to celebrate love. The irony was almost poetic. Michael thought it was his redemption arc, the chance to prove we were whole again. But as I arranged the lilies, the same kind I'd held at the altar, I couldn't help but smile. This time, they weren't symbols of purity. They were props for revelation. The night before the dinner, I rehearsed every detail in my head, the seating arrangement, the music, even the timing of the slideshow. Nothing could feel rushed or accidental. I wanted the reveal to be quiet, devastating, and unforgettable. I wasn't interested in chaos. I wanted clarity. Truth, unveiled with grace. My heart didn't race anymore when I thought of him. It was steady now, cold and sure, beating to a new rhythm I'd built out of betrayal. Michael came into the kitchen while I was testing the projector. "You're going all out," he said, smiling. I turned to him, matching his warmth. "You wanted to prove to everyone we're okay, remember? I'm just making sure they believe it." He kissed my temple, murmured that he was lucky. I almost pitied him for believing it. Almost. I tucked that feeling away, deep inside, right next to the remnants of love he'd already burned. There was no room for pity where I was going. Before bed, I stood by the window, looking out at the garden bathed in moonlight, the same place where he'd renewed his vows with lies still on his tongue. Tomorrow, that same ground would hold his truth. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Sometimes justice doesn't come with anger or tears. It arrives dressed in calmness, wrapped in silence, served cold under the glow of fairy lights. And as I turned off the lamp, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, he learns what vows really mean." By sunset, the garden looked almost identical to the day of our vow renewal. Same soft lights, same white tablecloths, same music humming faintly in the background. Everything appeared perfect, untouched. I'd made sure of it. Guests began arriving with laughter and warm hugs, their words sugar-coated with admiration. "You two look happier than ever," someone said. I smiled and thanked them, my voice steady. I had no intention of ruining the illusion, not yet. Michael moved through the crowd like a host reborn, laughing too loudly, gesturing too broadly, his hand brushing my back as if to mark his territory. I watched him perform, The man who'd once looked at me like I was his world, now trying to convince everyone that world still existed. "You're glowing," he whispered. I smiled faintly. "Maybe it's the lighting," I said. He laughed, not realizing that in a few minutes, those same lights would expose everything he'd hidden. When everyone was seated, I stood at the head of the table. "Before dinner," I said, "I wanted to share something special." Heads turned, glasses clinked, laughter faded. Michael looked at me, puzzled but trusting. "Just a small slideshow," I continued. "A celebration of love. Our 10 years together." He relaxed back in his chair, completely unaware. I pressed play on the remote, my pulse slow and deliberate, as the first photo appeared, our wedding day. The first few slides were harmless. Us on the beach, anniversaries, old trips. Laughter rippled softly through the table, the comfortable kind born of shared memories. Then the images began to change. The frame shifted to a photo of the hotel lobby. Another click. Michael, caught mid-step beside the woman in red. The air turned electric. I could hear the faintest gasp from someone across the table. My heart didn't pound. It waited, still and patient, as the truth bloomed in front of everyone. Michael froze. "What is this?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Memories," I said calmly. Another click. A close-up of his hand at her waist, the same hand that wore the ring he'd promised me with. Then the screenshots appeared, the messages he'd thought he'd deleted forever. The table fell silent. Every face turned toward him, a mix of confusion and disbelief. He tried to stand, but I placed my hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. "Sit," I whispered, the best part still coming. I turned back to the guests, my voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the air. "When we renewed our vows," I said, "the priest asked him if he promised fidelity. He said yes, but I guess his definition was flexible." A nervous chuckle from someone, quickly swallowed by silence. Michael's face was crimson, his breath short. "Grace, please," he started. I lifted a hand. "No, don't beg," I said quietly. "You already had your vows. This is mine." I took a breath and looked at him, really looked. His face was a collage of panic, shame, and disbelief. The man who once stood before me promising eternity now sat trembling under fairy lights and whispers. I picked up my glass, my voice steady. "I promise," I said slowly, "never to be fooled again." Then I slipped off my ring, the same one he'd sworn meant forever, and placed it gently on the table. It made the softest sound, a tiny final punctuation to a decade of lies. For a moment, no one moved. The guests stared, the music still playing faintly in the background, some love song that suddenly sounded cruel. Michael opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. I turned toward the crowd, smiled politely, and said, "Dinner's still warm. Please enjoy." A few people clapped, hesitant at first, then louder. Their applause didn't feel like pity. It felt like closure. As I walked away from the table, the night air hit my face like a new beginning. The lilies swayed in the breeze, the same flowers that had witnessed our vows, now standing as silent witnesses to his undoing. I didn't look back. He'd broken something sacred, but I'd rebuilt something stronger, myself. And while he sat there drowning in the truth, I finally exhaled. Revenge wasn't fire or fury. It was peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop pretending. Months later, I found myself sitting in a small seaside cafe, the kind that smelled of salt and roasted coffee beans. The waves moved lazily against the shore, their rhythm calm and certain, something I hadn't felt in years. I came here often now, alone but not lonely. There was a lightness in my chest that used to scare me, but now it felt like breathing for the first time. I'd traded noise for quiet, pretense for peace. And in that stillness, I met myself again. One morning, a man at the next table smiled and said, "You look peaceful, like someone who's figured it all out." His voice was kind, unassuming. I laughed softly, the sound surprising even me. Maybe I have, I said. I didn't tell him my story. He didn't need to know the ghosts that came before this smile. What mattered was that I could smile at all. Not to hide, not to prove, just to exist, to be. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about vows. How easy they are to make, how hard they are to keep. Michael had broken his, but in a strange way, he'd helped me make mine. Not to him, not to anyone else. To myself. To never settle for borrowed love again. The ocean shimmered in front of me, endless and open. And for the first time in a long time, so was I.